Hello, my name is Luke Riediger. I am the Executive Director of the Applegate Neighborhood Network and also the Conservation Director for the Klamath Forest Alliance's Siskiyou Field Office. So the Applegate Neighborhood Network works throughout the 500,000 acre Applegate River Watershed. We are a community and conservation-based organization representing the wildlands of the Applegate River and the Applegate Valley. The Klamath Forest Alliance is a conservation organization working throughout the Klamath Siskiyou Mountains in Northern California and Southwestern Oregon. Today I'm going to do a presentation called the Applegate Siskiyous, Wildlands, Wildflowers, and Biodiversity. And this presentation was originally put together for the Oregon Native Plant Society's annual meeting in 2019, which was conducted in the Applegate River Watershed. And the presentation is a brief overview of the Applegate River Watershed, its wildland habitats, and its spectacular biodiversity. So the Applegate River is located in the Rogue River Basin. The Applegate River flows into the Rogue River west of Grants Pass, Grants Pass, Oregon, and most of the watershed is located in southwestern Oregon, while the southernmost portions of the watershed up at the headwaters of the river are located in Siskiyou County in Northern California. So the region is located in the Siskiyou Mountains with its headwaters on the Siskiyou Crest. And at the western margin, there is a long, high elevation, north-south tending spur ridge known as the Grayback Range that divides the Applegate from the Illinois River watershed. Well, on the eastern end of the watershed, there is another north-south tending spur ridge extending from the Siskiyou Crest from McDonald Peak to Wagner Butte. And this divides the Little Applegate River watershed from the Rogue River Valley and the Bear Creek watershed near Medford and Ashland. The Siskiyou Mountains are the most botanically and geologically diverse mountains in Oregon, and the Siskiyou Crest is one of the most important connectivity corridors in the West Coast. The forests of the Applegate River watershed contain 22 species of conifers and vast swaths of old-growth forest like this here on Dutch Creek in the Condrey Mountain roadless area. The region also supports an incredible variety of vascular plants, as you can see here in the Silver Fork Basin, up on the Siskiyou Crest, and a rich mosaic of plant communities and habitat types representing species from the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, the Great Basin, the foothills of California, the mountains of the Sierra Nevada, and the interior valleys of both California and Oregon. Unlike the major north-south tending mountain ranges of the West Coast, the Siskiyou Crest is a transverse range running east to west. So at the eastern end, the region straddles the Oregon-California border, shown, and the Siskiyou Crest here is shown with the red arrows. So it begins on the eastern end along the California border, then plunges south above the Klamath River. And the Siskiyou Crest provides connectivity between the major mountain ranges of the West Coast by connecting the Cascade Range to the Coast Range. So you can see here, these red arrows show how the Siskiyou Crest ties in with connectivity corridors and ridge systems that tie into the Coast Range of Oregon and Northern California. You can also see here in the blue how the Siskiyou Crest ties into the Cascade Mountains, which is the major mountain chain of the Pacific Northwest. And the Siskiyou Crest collides with the Cascades at the designated Cascade Siskiyou National Monument, which was protected to provide connectivity between the mountain ranges and protect that important biological corridor between the two ranges. There are also influences coming in from the Great Basin to the east. So these move into the region through the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument, through the Upper Klamath River, and east from the Shasta Valley, and southeast from the Shasta Valley, where high desert species and Great Basin species move into the Siskiyou Crest from those more arid eastern habitats, and then traverse across the range into populations that are some of the more westernmost populations of Great Basin species that you'll find. So the Siskiyou Mountains are also included within the California Floristic Province, which includes influences moving in from California through the Klamath Mountains, the Shasta Valley, and through the upper Sacramento River watershed. So the Applegate River watershed itself provides connectivity between the low elevation habitats of interior southwestern Oregon and the Wild Rogue and Kalmiopsis region to the west. So the Applegate Valley and the Applegate River watershed is really important because it provides a really important connectivity between low elevation habitats in the foothills of the Applegate and in the Siskiyou Mountains to the west, the western Siskiyou Mountains, and it connects those habitats to the high Siskiyou Crest and the high elevation habitats at the headwaters of the river. So the Applegate River watershed also contains a significant concentration of unprotected wildlands, including 6 inventoried roadless areas and 15 uninventoried roadless areas. It also includes the roughly 20,000 acre Red Buttes Wilderness area. And this map shows roadless areas down to about 1,000 acres. And you can see that they are very abundant in this region and represent the most intact habitats remaining in the Applegate River watershed. The watershed also contains 8 designated botanical areas on Forest Service lands, most of which are found on the Siskiyou Crest itself. So this is a photograph of Lee's Lewisia blooming in the Big Red Mountain Botanical Area up on the Siskiyou Crest at the headwaters of the Little Applegate River. The area also contains many unprotected botanical hotspots. This is Tamarack Meadows, which is found on the eastern Siskiyou Crest at the headwaters of Elliott Creek. And Tamarack Meadows was a candidate botanical area in the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest Land and Resource Management Plan, but was not protected. And what's important about this area is that it has these beautiful wet meadows, and it has one of the only populations of lodgepole pine in the eastern Siskiyou Mountains. So the forests of the Applegate are quite diverse. They include a diverse mixture of moist conifer forests, like this one you see here in the Hinkle Lake Botanical Area and in the Kangaroo Roadless area up on O'Connell Creek. The area also contains a lot of dry mixed conifer forests with significant populations of pine species and hardwoods. There is also a lot of oak woodlands in the area, especially at lower elevations on south and west facing slopes in what we call the Applegate foothills. This area also contains a lot of arid grasslands, which are kind of characteristic for this region and are found predominantly on south facing slopes. And you also find some of the northernmost populations of chaparral in the range of chaparral habitats. And you'll find pretty large populations here in the Applegate River watershed at the northernmost portion of their range. The Siskiyou Crest also contains some spectacular high country and big cirque basins and high elevation meadows, like this one up here in the Silver Fork Basin in the Observation Peak roadless area. And the area also contains a lot of clear mountain streams that flow down from the Siskiyou Crest, creating the Applegate River. And this is the middle fork of the Applegate River down below the Red Buttes Wilderness area. So in some locations, the high, dry ridgelines support habitats indicative of the sagebrush steppe of eastern Oregon. And you can also find a lot of plant species that are representative of the Great Basin, such as quaking aspen, which you find in only a handful of sites throughout the Siskiyou Mountains. But there are some beautiful populations up in the McDonald Peak roadless area of quaking aspen, and also they extend all the way out west to Bigelow Lakes up above the Oregon Caves, actually in the Illinois River watershed. There's about 11 or 12 populations across the Siskiyou Crest of quaking aspen. So the Applegate Valley and the Applegate River watershed is really quite diverse. It's a transitional watershed, which contains distinctly different ecosystems across moisture and elevational gradients. So moisture increases from east to west, with the interior portions of the watershed supporting far less precipitation than the more temperate portions of the watershed on the western end. And elevation also plays an important role, where You get more rainfall and more snow at the higher elevations, and therefore you get more productive forests and less of the non-forest plant communities like oak woodland and chaparral. So for example, in the rain shadow of the Siskiyou Crest, the Little Applegate River Watershed contains areas that average less than 15 inches of annual rainfall and is the driest watershed in Western Oregon. This photo shows the Dock-a-Batiti roadless area up in the upper portions of the Little Applegate River Canyon. And you can see that at lower elevations in this area, the area is dominated by dry grasslands, chaparral habitats, oak woodland, oak savanna, and some of the largest populations of Western juniper in the Siskiyou Mountains that actually create the westernmost population in Oregon. Roughly 20 miles to the west in the mountains of the lower Applegate, dense fog drifts in from the coast and rainfall averages over 50 inches annually, supporting productive conifer forests and creating a significant contrast between the more moist western portions of the watershed and the dry interior portions of the watershed. So as I said earlier, elevation also plays an important role in influencing precipitation and vegetation patterns in the Applegate River watershed, with the low elevation sites supporting vast non-forest plant communities such as oak woodlands and grasslands. And they are generally arid areas like you see here in the foreground on Goat Cabin Ridge and the Dock-a-Batiti roadless area. But as you transition into those higher elevation sites up on the Siskiyou Crest, you get increasing conifer cover habitat due to increased precipitation and snow loads. And you can see that here in this photograph where the oak woodlands and grasslands transition into those mixed conifer forests up on Wagner Butte, which is in the background of this photograph, which is over 7,000 feet in elevation. So the Applegate River watershed contains 3 distinct ecoregions, including the lower Applegate, the Applegate foothills, and the Siskiyou Crest. So my presentation will explore each major ecoregion from the Siskiyou Crest to the confluence of the Applegate River and the Rogue River west of Grants Pass. So the Siskiyou Crest creates a ridgeline divide between the Applegate River and the Klamath River watershed, but the range starts in obscurity as a jumble of ridges near Crescent City, California, and at the mouth of the Klamath River in northwestern California. So the crest rises from the flank of the Oregon and California coast ranges, as I said, near Crescent City, California, and the Smith River area. So you have everything from very moist coastal Douglas fir forests and redwood forests transitioning up through the ridge systems of the coast ranges towards the Siskiyou Crest. So multiple ridges that are the beginning of the Siskiyou Crest merge in the Siskiyou Wilderness area, which is on the ridgeline divide between the Smith River watershed and the Klamath River watershed. And once these ridges merge in the Siskiyou Wilderness, the Siskiyou Crest is now a single contiguous ridge system running north between the headwaters of the Smith River and watersheds of the Klamath River, namely Clear Creek in downstream of Happy Camp in the Klamath River watershed. And to the east, you will also find a ridgeline divide that drains north into the Illinois River watershed. So the Siskiyou Wilderness is kind of that area where these 3 major watersheds in northwestern California and southwestern Oregon merge. So the Siskiyou Crest continues east from the Siskiyou Wilderness area and from the upper portions of the Illinois River watershed. And enters the Applegate River watershed in the Red Buttes Wilderness area near Sucker Gap at the headwaters of Carberry Creek. So from Sucker Gap, the ridgeline forks, and the main Siskiyou Crest continues heading east, while the Grayback Range and the unprotected Oregon portions of the Kangaroo Roadless area extend to the north to the 7,255-foot summit of Grayback Mountain and beyond. And so Grayback Mountain is shown in this photograph with the arrow there on the divide between the Illinois River watershed and the Applegate River watershed and above Williams, Oregon. So this high elevation corridor of forest and meadow creates the Applegate River Watershed's western divide and separates the more coastal Illinois River Watershed from the headwaters of the Applegate River. The Grayback Range is named after Grayback Mountain, the area's most prominent peak. But the region supports a variety of lush meadows and extends east from the summit of Grayback Mountain into the Grayback Botanical area at the headwaters of O'Brien Creek. And so you can see these lush meadows and beautiful old-growth forests at the headwaters of O'Brien Creek. They are located within the Kangaroo Roadless area, and the meadows themselves are protected as the Grayback Botanical area and support a variety of rare plant species. So the Oregon portions of the Kangaroo Roadless area also include Steve Peak Ridge and the Oliver Matthews Research Natural Area at the headwaters of Carberry Creek. So this area includes numerous groves of Baker's cypress. This is the world's northernmost cypress tree and one of the rarest conifers in the world. This population is one of only 11 populations of Baker's cypress worldwide and contains some of the largest trees in its limited range. And the thing that's important about and interesting about the Baker's cypress is that although it's found in only 11 populations worldwide, and the majority of those are in the Klamath-Siskiyou Mountains, there are also populations in the Southern Cascades that grow on lava flows. And you will find that this species, although its range is very limited and its population is generally fairly small, it is found in a unique variety of soil types on different exposures. And there is really nothing that connects these populations except for extremely poor soil conditions, which provides them an opportunity to compete with the surrounding forest and the surrounding vegetation. So there are also a lot of wet meadows in the botanical areas and in the area around the Grayback Range up at the higher elevations. And these contain the northernmost populations of bristly gentian or Gentian pleurisitosa, which is reaches its northern the northern extent of its range in the Grayback Mountain area and in the Bigelow Lakes Botanical area. So from Sucker Creek and now extending again east on the Siskiyou Crest, the Grayback Range meets the Siskiyou Crest there at Sucker Gap and heads north, while the Siskiyou Crest continues to the east as the main ridgeline dividing the Applegate River Watershed from the Klamath River Watershed. And from here, the Siskiyou Crest enters the Red Buttes, the main portion of the Red Buttes Wilderness area. So the Red Buttes Wilderness area is a very rugged region, has a lot of really rocky summits and high mountain scenery, and it is the headwaters of the Applegate River Watershed, the main stem of the Applegate River. So this rocky high country divides the Applegate River from the Klamath River Watershed, as I said, and you can see that these are the rocky summits of the Siskiyou Crest, extending down into each watershed, the Applegate River to the north and the Klamath River to the south. So this area contains some of the most scenic high country in the Siskiyou Crest, with beautiful high mountain lakes and incredible biodiversity. It also contains some very spectacular floral displays with beautiful rock gardens all across the ridgelines of the Siskiyou Crest, and just very diverse floral displays out there on these rocky ridges. And then you also get some beautiful wet meadows in the area, such as the Hinkle Lake Botanical area here in the Kangaroo Roadless area, directly adjacent to the Red Buttes Wilderness area. And within those wet meadows, you get a lot of lush vegetation, like this Wiggins lily, which, although relatively common throughout the Klamath-Siskiyou Mountains, is endemic to our region and is found nowhere else in the world. Then there are also a lot of serpentine habitats in the Red Buttes Wilderness area. The namesake of the wilderness area, Red Butte, is actually a large rocky summit of peridotite soils, which is a form of serpentine. And these serpentine soils are low in essential plant nutrients. They're high in heavy metals. They're essentially toxic to plant life. And so a lot of species that grow there have developed adaptations to persist in these low nutrient sites with strange heavy metal contents. And so you get these stunted forests and these beautiful Jeffrey pine savannas that tend to colonize the more rocky, dry portions of the ridgelines and of the slopes in the Red Buttes Wilderness area. And so the boundary of the Red Buttes Wilderness area abruptly ends at the summit of Red Butte, excluding tens of thousands of acres of intact habitat to the east. And so you can see in this photograph here, the ridge line that you're looking at, the slopes to the west are protected in the Red Buttes Wilderness area, but the equally wild slopes to the east of Red Butte are not protected and are included within the kangaroo inventoried roadless area and have long been proposed for wilderness designation. So from Red Butte, these serpentine soils extend east to Cook and Green Pass, which is a low saddle at about 4,800 feet. It's one of the lowest saddles in the Siskiyou Mountains. And below Cook and Green Pass on the Applegate side of the ridge on the northern slope is a large intact watershed called Cook and Green Creek. And so this photo is looking from Cook and Green Butte down the Cook and Green Creek watershed and into the mountains of the Applegate Valley. So Cook and Green Pass is designated as by the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest as a botanical area. And Elk Meadows, which is within the designated botanical area, is likely the most intact high mountain meadow and wetland system in the Siskiyou Mountains due to the lack of historic grazing in this area. So you can see the very sensitive hydrology and the sensitive wetland habitats there in the Elk Meadows area. There's a lot of rare species that you'll find in this area. And this is just a really excellent example of intact high elevation wet meadow habitat on the Siskiyou Crest. And it is currently protected in the Cook and Green Pass Botanical Area. So the high country of the Red Buttes also contains some interesting conifer species. There are 2 stands of Alaska yellow cedar in the Applegate River Watershed. These include the Mount Emily area, or excuse me, there are 3 stands of Alaska yellow cedar in the Applegate River Watershed and in and around the Red Buttes Wilderness area. So these include groves up at Mount Emily, at the headwaters of Frog Pond Gulch in the Red Buttes Wilderness area, and also at the headwaters of Desolation Gulch below Kangaroo Mountain and Desolation Peak up on the Siskiyou Crest. And there is another area just outside the Red Buttes Wilderness area called the Whiskey Peak Botanical Area at the headwaters of Slick Rock Creek. And this contains the most mature stands of Alaska cedar in the Siskiyou Mountain range. And what's interesting about Alaska yellow cedar is that it's a northern species dependent on cool, moist habitats. And so it's found all the way up into Alaska and British Columbia and extends down the Cascade Crest in particularly moist and cool habitats. So these populations in the Siskiyou Mountains are some of the southernmost populations that you will find of Alaska yellow cedar. The southernmost population is actually in the Siskiyou Wilderness area above the town of Orleans, California. And so that is a very rare species you'll find nowhere else in the Siskiyou Mountains but these handful of sites. Another rare conifer that you'll find in the Siskiyou Mountains is the brewer's spruce. So this is a paleo-endemic to the Klamath-Siskiyou Mountains. So this species reaches back before the ice ages and has persisted in the Siskiyou Mountains for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and is found nowhere else in the world outside of the Klamath-Siskiyou Mountains. So this species tends to grow in cool, north-facing slopes at high to middle elevations, and you will find some very beautiful and extensive populations of a brewer's spruce in the Red Buttes Wilderness area. This is up near Goff Butte in the Red Buttes Wilderness area. That's where this picture was taken. The Red Buttes Wilderness Area also includes numerous rare plant species, including Howell's lousewort, or Pedicularis howellii, which can be found in the Red Buttes Wilderness Area and in the surrounding high elevation habitats. It also includes Loeb's buckwheat, which is found here at the northern extent of its range. It's more common in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and reaches into Oregon watersheds in the Red Buttes Wilderness Area. The northernmost population is actually out on Silver Creek in the Kalmiopsis area and in the North Kalmiopsis roadless area. But you will find beautiful and extensive populations of Loeb's buckwheat on some of the mountain passes high in the Red Buttes Wilderness Area. Then you'll also find some beautiful populations of few-flowered dicentra or Dicentra passiflora, and it's abundant in the rocky headwalls near Red Butte and Kangaroo Mountain, often on serpentine soils in high elevation, cool, moist habitats. You'll also find the endemic Siskiyou fritillary or Fritillary glauca, which grows in rocky soils throughout the region and has large populations near Devil's Ridge in the Red Buttes Wilderness Area. So another species that you will find and is rather rare in the Red Buttes Wilderness Area is Newberry's gentian. You'll find this in moist meadow habitats near Cook and Green Pass. I've also found populations near Azalea Lake at the headwaters of the Butte Fork of the Applegate River. And this is, again, a species that really just comes into Oregon, mostly in the Red Buttes Wilderness Area. And my understanding is there is another small population up in the Three Sisters Wilderness Area, and that is the entire Oregon population of Newberry gentian, most of which is found in the Red Buttes Wilderness Area. You will also find California lady slipper, which is an endemic plant found on serpentine soils in serpentine wetlands and seeps, and often along, you also often find in it lining some of these more harsh serpentine streams at high to mid elevations in the Red Buttes Wilderness Area. So that's the California lady slipper. So despite the beauty of the high country, the Red Buttes Wilderness is more than just rocky ridgelines and floral displays. In fact, the Red Buttes Wilderness and the surrounding roadless areas contain extensive tracts of old-growth forests like these here in the middle fork of the Applegate River Watershed. And the majority of the old-growth forest in this photograph is roadless, uncut old-growth forest that is unprotected. Only the headwaters of this stream near the meadow there that you see in the photo, which is Phantom Meadows, is protected in the Red Buttes Wilderness Area. So these old-growth forests extend from the ridges up by the Siskiyou Crest down into the canyons and the main tributary streams of the Red Buttes Wilderness Area. So this is a beautiful and enormous old sugar pine that you'll find that's growing on the Butte Fork of the Applegate River in the Red Buttes Wilderness Area. So then we will continue east across the Siskiyou Crest, leaving the Red Buttes Wilderness Area, which extends to Red Butte and the roadless area, the Kangaroo Roadless Area that surrounds the Red Buttes Wilderness Area on all sides, extends east from Red Butte and the wilderness boundary to Cook and Green Pass. And then east of Cook and Green Pass, the serpentines of the Red Buttes Wilderness Area kind of fizzle out. And the Siskiyou Crest passes through schist soils in the Condrey Mountain Roadless Area. So the serpentine soils to the west are ancient ocean floor that have been uplifted and folded and faulted and turned and pushed inland and become, have been risen out of the ocean floor to become mountain ranges. And these schist soils that dominate the Condrey Mountain Roadless Area are the ancient sediment layers that once sat on that ocean floor and are now metamorphized into the layered rock that we know today as schist, and that dominates the Condrey Mountain Roadless Area. So you can see here, this is a schist outcrop up near Cook and Green Butte, and you can see that a lot of the schist is kind of this bluish color, and it contrasts quite readily with that red that you can see in the background up above on the slopes above Syad Creek, which are serpentine soils. And you can see how both tend to create some fairly harsh soil conditions when the soils are shallow and rocky, and create these beautiful rock gardens and kind of open chaparral and woodland habitats. But as the Condrey Mountain roadless area extends east into the Elliott Creek watershed, you enter large blocks of schist soil that have more deep soils and more productive forests. And so you have a beautiful mixture of lush high mountain meadows at the headwaters of Elliott Creek and Dutch Creek, which is a tributary of Elliott Creek. And those watersheds extend down into very deep mountain canyons filled with some of the most lush and abundant old growth forest in the Siskiyou Mountain Range. So this area just contains a lot of really beautiful streams that flow down off of the Siskiyou Crest, such as Dutch Creek here, that extend through the Condrey Mountain roadless area down into the main stem of Elliott Creek in the Elliott Creek watershed, which hydrologically speaking is essentially the eastern fork of the Applegate River Watershed. So the Siskiyou Crest gains elevation as it heads east and reaches the Scraggy Mountain Botanical Area, which was designated to protect particularly intact herbaceous plant communities near the summit of Studhorse, or near the top of Studhorse Creek and near the summit of Scraggy Mountain. Near Condrey Mountain, just to the east of Scraggy Mountain, the crest enters what are truly subalpine environments. And so this eastern Siskiyou Crest, it tends to be higher in elevation than the crest to the line to the west. And it includes a lot of subalpine forest, a lot of moist mountain meadows, dry mountain meadows and grasslands, and big cirque walls and rock faces that create the headwaters of these streams that drain into Elliott Creek, such as Alex Creek, seen here. So the Condrey Mountain roadless area contains the only stands of Pacific silver fir in the Siskiyou Mountains in the White Mountain Botanical Area. And similar to the Alaska yellow cedar, this is a species that is predominantly found to the north of us here in the Siskiyou Mountains. It grows throughout the Cascade Mountains and up into BC and Alaska. And again, likes those cool, moist habitat conditions and has found only small niches here on the northern slopes of Dutch Creek where it has been able to persist throughout time. And so you have these extensive populations of Pacific silver fir, including many old growth trees, up at the headwaters of Dutch Creek, and also a small population in the Condrey Mountain roadless area at the headwaters of Joe Creek, also in the Elliott Creek watershed. The area also contains large populations of Siskiyou bitterroot, an endemic species that's found only in the Klamath-Siskiyou Mountains. At Alex Hole, at the headwaters of Alex Creek below Condrey Mountain, the roadless area supports the only population of ledge stonecrop, or Rhodiola integrifolia, in the Siskiyou Mountain Range. And this grows on steep schist outcrops. It's more commonly found in the Sierra Nevada, and the only population in the Siskiyou Mountains can be found here at the headwaters of Alex Creek in the Alex Hole area below Condrey Mountain. You will also find the only known population of Henderson's lomatian on the Siskiyou Crest near Cook and Green Pass. It's actually quite a large population that was recently discovered by myself and my partner as we were hiking through the Condrey Mountain roadless area early in the late spring, early summer months before the snow has melted on the north-facing slope. This species will flower in abundance on the south-facing slopes. The species is more common in the dry east side environments of the Modoc Plateau, and you can also find it in Harney County in southeastern Oregon. So it's more adapted to arid, high desert kind of conditions, and you'll find it growing in these south-facing rock faces at the headwaters of Syad Creek. The southernmost population of American sawwort and the only population in California is also found near White Mountain in the White Mountain Botanical Area. and in the Condrey Mountain roadless area. So this is, again, a species that is more common to the north and just finds a handful of high mountain habitats where it can persist in the Siskiyou Mountains. So from Condrey Mountain and extending east, you leave the Condrey Mountain roadless area and head into the eastern Siskiyou Crest, which tends to be higher in elevation and be a little bit less endowed with large roadless areas, but has quite a number of small roadless areas that connect together, creating a really wonderful chain of connectivity as the Siskiyou Mountains transition east towards the Cascade Mountains. So this area has some big cirque basins, some large wet meadows like this one here at Dunmore Meadows at the headwaters of Elliott Creek. There's also dry bunch grass clearings, which have become relatively rare in the Siskiyou Mountains due to historic overgrazing, but you can find some very beautiful and intact populations of dry bunch grass habitat in the roadless areas on the eastern Siskiyou Crest, such as here near Siskiyou Gap at the edge of the Big Red Mountain Botanical Area and the Big Red Mountain roadless area. The eastern Siskiyou Crest also contains a much more abundant subalpine forest, which includes white fir, red fir, which is shown here in the photograph, and mountain hemlock. And this plant community is much more abundant in the eastern Siskiyou Crest because of the higher elevations and because of more snow load that accumulates at those higher elevations between, say, Dutchman's Peak and Mount Ashland. So this eastern Siskiyou Crest, like the crest to the west, also contains really spectacular wildflower displays and very diverse rock garden habitats that include a lot of rare species. The eastern slopes of the Siskiyou Crest near Dutchman Peak and in the Dutchman Peak Botanical Area contain vast open slopes and bunch grass clearings. And they also support a heavy influence of east side species. So you get these low growing sagebrushes, you get a lot of mountain mahogany, and you get a lot of species that you find more predominantly in the high deserts of eastern Oregon that creep into our region and extend across the Siskiyou Crest out into some of these more exposed and dry habitats in the Dutchman Peak Botanical Area and the Glade Creek Roadless Area. So continuing east from Dutchman's Peak, the next major summit on the Siskiyou Crest is called Big Red Mountain. And this is the easternmost incursion of serpentine soils on the Siskiyou Crest, and therefore the oldest serpentine soils on the Siskiyou Crest. These soils are hundreds of millions of years old and have a long history of floral and plant evolution that have persisted on these sites in these serpentine soils due to the minimal glaciation that existed in the Siskiyou Mountains during the ice ages. And so this area has a lot of rare species growing in it. And you can see that this is the Big Red Mountain Botanical Area. There's also a research natural area in this region. And both of those areas are encompassed in the Big Red Mountain Botanical Area. And the Pacific Crest Trail runs through this whole region from Cook and Green Pass all the way over to Mount Ashland through this series of botanical areas and roadless areas. So these areas up near Big Red Mountain in the Research Natural Area and in the Botanical Area support beautiful Jeffrey pine and western white pine woodlands. The western white pine in particular has become rare in our area because of a non-native blister rust that is killing western white pine trees. And you will, fortunately, you will still find some fairly intact populations of western white pine in the area around Big Red Mountain. You'll also find some very spectacular wildflower displays, one of the most impressive of which is the beargrass bloom that tends to bloom every summer up on the slopes of Big Red Mountain, especially on the northern slopes, where the Big Red Mountain roadless area, the Big Red Mountain Botanical Area, and the Research Natural Area all collide. And then we're going to talk real quick here also about the Wagner Butte area, which is included in the McDonald Peak roadless area. So this is at the eastern margin of the Red Buttes watershed, and at the headwaters of the Little Applegate River. So this divides, this ridgeline is a major north-south spur ridge extending north from the Siskiyou Crest. And it divides the Bear Creek Valley and the Ashland Medford area from the Little Applegate River watershed. And as I said, the majority of this ridge system is included in the McDonald Peak roadless area. So now, as you head east here into the McDonald Peak roadless area, you're now on granitic soils, mostly decomposed granitic soils. And this is what they call the Mount Ashland Pluton. And so it's a large area of these well-drained granitic soils that have, it's essentially a granitic incursion that has developed here in the eastern Siskiyou Mountains and supports a really interesting array of plant species, including large populations of species more common in the arid habitats of eastern Oregon. And so you can see here on the slopes of Wagner Butte, these interesting plant communities where forests more indicative of the Pacific Northwest, such as white fir forests and red fir forests, mingle with these open sagebrush clearings. So it creates a really interesting contrast and some really important habitat with rare species, just like a lot of the summits throughout the Siskiyou Crest to the west. So finally, east of the Applegate River watershed, the Siskiyou Crest transitions into the Cascade Mountains in the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument near Pilot Rock. So this area is a unique blend of Cascade forest and Great Basin habitats, but it is also infused with the botanical diversity of the Siskiyou Mountains. And so although this area is protected currently as the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument, the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument also actually includes very little and almost none of the Siskiyou Mountains, which provide such important connectivity and such important biological and botanical diversity to the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument. The Siskiyou Crest essentially feeds this area with biodiversity, and although unprotected currently, is one of the more important features providing this area with its biodiversity and its unique habitat characteristics. So the eastern Siskiyou Crest, we're going to go through some of the rare plant species that you'll find in this area and in the botanical areas in the eastern Siskiyou Mountains. They contain some pretty spectacular displays and large populations of the traveler's gentian. This population here is up on Big Red Mountain, growing on serpentine soils, and it's just a really beautiful high mountain species you'll find up in the cirque basins and up in the higher elevations. You will also find Lee's Lewisia, which is a species more common in the high country of the Sierra Nevada mountains, but is rare in Oregon. It's a little rock garden species that you'll find near the summit of Big Red Mountain and all across the summit of the Siskiyou Crest. The Klamath-Siskiyou Mountains also support numerous endemic species that are found nowhere else in the world, such as the split hair paintbrush, this little purple paintbrush that you'll find growing in the rock gardens at high elevations throughout the eastern Siskiyou Crest. You can also find what we call Siskiyou fireweed, which is found most often in rocky serpentine sites at high elevations on north-facing slopes. You will also find the endemic Henderson's Horkelia. This is found in only 5 sites on the Siskiyou Crest and 1 site in the Marble Mountains Wilderness area. It grows in well-drained soils such as decomposed granitics and also on schist soils. And the entire world's population, or in the entire population, at least on the Siskiyou Crest, is found between Mount Ashland and Dry Lake Lookout near Condrey Mountain. And as I said, there are only 5 populations in the Siskiyou Mountains. So this is a really rare species that folks can find growing in these well-drained soils at high elevations. Another endemic to our area is the James Canyon buckwheat. This also grows on dry granitics and in schist soils. It likes those well-drained soils, just like the Henderson's Horkelia. And you'll often find the two growing in similar locations. And there are about 8 distinct populations of James Canyon buckwheat between Condrey Mountain and Mount Ashland on the Siskiyou Crest. Another rare species you'll find in the area is Howell's tausha. This grows on granitic soils in the eastern portions of the Siskiyou Crest, mostly in the McDonald Peak roadless area. And this species is found in only a few locations in the Siskiyou Mountains and this far north, and is actually quite rare as well down in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So these disjunct northernmost populations are really quite rare. They're really sensitive little plants, and they're really have a lot of potential to be damaged by inappropriate management due to the sensitivity of the sites they grow on and due to the small populations that exist in the Siskiyou Mountains. So we're going to transition here from the Siskiyou Crest, from the headwaters of the river into the more arid low country of the Applegate foothills, shown here, depicted here in yellow. So the Applegate foothills are located in the rain shadow of the Siskiyou Crest. They extend from roughly 1,500 feet to 5,000 feet in elevation in the upper, little, and middle Applegate River watersheds. These distinct foothills are a unique blend of forest and grassland and shrubland and woodland habitats that are unique to Oregon and more indicative of the foothills of California. The Applegate foothills are located largely on BLM lands, but there are also portions of this area that are located on Forest Service lands, such as the Little Grayback roadless area. And these areas provide really important connectivity habitat, connecting the high country of the Siskiyou Crest to the low elevation habitats in the Applegate foothills and surrounding the Applegate Valley. The mosaic of vegetation in this area is really quite diverse and patchy. The vegetation ranges from grassland to forest, depending on aspects, slope position, and soils. South and west facing slopes, especially on the upper third of the slope, contain upland prairies or balds, which are arid grasslands that really are quite characteristic of the Applegate foothills region. These balds contain some very spectacular spring wildflower displays and contribute significantly to both the character of the region and to the region's intense biodiversity. So what you'll find in the Applegate foothills is a really interesting mosaic of habitats that includes white and black oak, savanna, which is often found adjacent to these large upland prairies or balds. You'll also find a lot of open-grown ponderosa pine adjacent to these openings up on the higher portions of the slopes. The mid slopes of the Applegate foothills are often dominated by white oak woodland and stands of mixed hardwoods, which include large patches of Pacific madrone. The Applegate foothills also support the northern extension of chaparral with large patches of buckbrush, as well as white-leaf manzanita. And the Applegate foothills also contain numerous east side species not typically found in Western Oregon. On the ridge tops, isolated populations of Western juniper are found in the little and into the middle Applegate River watersheds, with the largest populations being found on Anderson Butte in the Dakabetiti roadless area in the Little Applegate River watershed. Big sagebrush can also be found creeping into the Applegate foothills on Bald Mountain in the Little Applegate River watershed. And the areas also support some beautiful dry mixed conifer forests, including old growth forests that tend to be found in the canyon bottoms, as well as on north and sometimes east facing slopes. They're dominated often by Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, and various hardwood species. The Applegate foothills are a population center for Fritillary gentnerii, or Gentner's fritillary. This is an endangered species that is endemic to southwestern Oregon and found nowhere else in the world. Most of the world's population is found within an 11-mile radius of Jacksonville, Oregon, and is with a few outlier populations scattered throughout southwestern Oregon, and a couple populations reaching barely into Northern California in the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument. But some of the largest concentration of Gentner's fritillary are found in the Applegate foothills, especially in the Dakabetiti roadless area and in portions of the Little and Middle Applegate River watersheds. Another endemic that you'll find in the Applegate foothills is the Applegate stonecrop. So this is actually the only species of plant that is endemic to the Applegate River watershed. So it is found nowhere else outside of the Applegate River watershed. And you'll find it largely growing in exposed rocky areas, growing on rock outcrops like this shown in the photograph here near Anderson Butte. But it is found throughout the Applegate foothills. The area also supports numerous range extensions, so northern range extensions for species more common in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada or maybe the California coast ranges. And this includes the only population of giant death camas, Toxicoscordion exaltatum, in the state of Oregon, which is found in the upper Applegate River watershed in the Burton 9-mile roadless area and lands with wilderness characteristics on BLM lands. We also have the slender-flowered primrose, which is more common in California and is found only in a few sites here in the Applegate River watershed. Most of its population is found around Rouge, Oregon, but you can also find them in the upper Applegate River area in the Little Grayback roadless area. As we mentioned earlier, the Applegate foothills have this northern extension of chaparral species. And that includes the only population of hollyleaf redberry in Oregon, which is found in the upper Applegate River Valley. So there are some fairly robust populations of this species growing in amongst the buckbrush and the manzanita fields in the upper Applegate River watershed. And my understanding is there are also a few populations out in the Cascade Siskiyou Monument out on Scotch Creek, where you'll find them growing in similar habitats. But this is really a rare species in Oregon and is found only in this area right along the California-Oregon border in a handful of sites. Another chaparral species that you might find in the area and that is only found in the upper Applegate River watershed in Oregon is the bush beard tongue, or Kekiella lemonii. And perhaps the rarest plant species found in the Applegate River watershed is the Siskiyou mariposa lily. This species is a narrow endemic found in 2 distinct ridgelines near Wairika, California, and 1 extremely small population in Oregon. The Oregon population is found within the Bald Mountain roadless area on the ridgeline dividing the Little Applegate River watershed from Talent, Oregon in the Rogue Valley. And this entire population consists of a few mature flowering plants on 1 small rock outcrop. That is the entire Oregon population of the species. It's found, as I said, in the Little Applegate River watershed in a wildland up by Bald Mountain, and it is currently threatened by not only BLM timber sales, but also by off-road vehicle use. So each spring, the Applegate foothills put on quite a beautiful flower display, and it supports not only rare plant species that we've already looked at, but also a lot of more common species that are characteristic of this region, such as the silver lupin here, shown here. Also found abundantly throughout the Applegate foothills is Henderson's fawn lily. And although common in our area, this is actually a southwestern Oregon endemic and is found nowhere else outside of southwestern Oregon. We also have large populations of Henderson's tritolea, the scarlet fritillary, which is very similar, but a distinctly different species from the rare Gentner's fritillary. There are large swaths of Henderson's shooting star in the oak woodlands. Patches of Indian warrior or Pedicularis howellii that extend throughout the western portions of the Applegate River watershed. and some of Oregon's westernmost population of Brown's peony, which is one of my favorite flower species and is often found in arid grasslands and oak woodland habitats in some of the roadless areas and some of the wildlands in the upper Applegate and in the middle Applegate River watershed. So now transitioning west into the lower Applegate area, the arid foothills sort of transition into these more moist habitats in the lower Applegate River country. So at the western margin of the watershed, this lower Applegate River watershed receives abundant winter fog that rolls in from the coast and much higher levels of annual precipitation, and in turn tends to support more coastal species that are not found in the more interior parts of the Applegate River watershed. So these include Port Orford cedar, which is largely a coastal species. It's endemic to southwestern Oregon and northwestern California, and it creeps into the western Applegate River watershed in moist habitats between Slate Creek and Williams Creek. It's often found growing along with tan oak, evergreen huckleberry, and red huckleberry, western azalea, and other species that are very indicative of the coast ranges of Oregon, and provides really interesting plant communities in contrast between the more unproductive soils in those areas and these lush old forests with abundant coastal species. So on these more arid and unproductive soils, you find some fairly large or incursions of serpentine soils or periddotites. And you find these on these unproductive soils, you find these sparse, open serpentine woodlands of Jeffrey pine. So you have habitats ranging from Jeffrey pine woodland to Jeffrey pine savanna, which is shown here in the photograph. And these habitats are more indicative of what you will find at low elevations in the Illinois River Valley, but creep into the Applegate River in some of the more western watersheds, such as Slate Creek. So Slate Creek supports a large incursion of serpentine soils. The area contains the Slate Creek roadless area, which encompasses the largely intact upper Slate Creek watershed. And also found within the area is the Cedar Log Flat Research Natural Area. So the Cedar Log Flat Research Natural Area supports the only population of Darlingtonia californica, or cobra lily, in the Applegate River watershed. And this is a carnivorous plant species that grows in these moist, what we call fens. They're sort of like bogs. They're wet areas, wetlands, on serpentine habitats. And due to the lack of competition in those sites and the unusual soils and the characteristics of those soils, you have these large populations of cobra lily surviving and persisting along these seeps, springs, and streams in the Slate Creek watershed. And you will find them nowhere else in the Applegate River area. There are also numerous other rare species found in the Cedar Log Flat Research Natural Area, some that are more common in the Illinois River watershed, such as Waldo buckwheat or Eriogonum pendulum that is shown here. This species was thought to be endemic to the southern Illinois River Valley, and the only populations outside of the Illinois River watershed are found here on Slate Creek. Another area in the lower Applegate River watershed that is really quite important from a botanical standpoint is Bolt Mountain. And so this is another area of serpentine soils in the lower Applegate River watershed. It's located on BLM lands and directly adjacent to the Josephine County's Fish Hatchery Park. So this area contains low elevation habitats adjacent to the lower portions of the Applegate River and very abundant spring flower displays. There are some rare species that you'll find in that area as well, such as the large flowered star tulip, Calcordus uniflorus, which blooms in vernally moist meadows and is very uncommon in the Applegate River watershed. You'll find it at the base of Bolt Mountain in seasonally wet meadows. In those same habitats, you will find Howell's violet. So this is another low elevation serpentine species, more common in the Illinois River Valley, but creeping into the Applegate River watershed in the Slate Creek region and in the Bolt Mountain region, excuse me. So the highest summits in the lower Applegate are found around Round Top Mountain. So Round Top Mountain contains a roadless area, and it has been designated by the BLM as a lands with wilderness characteristics. The area supports a lot of serpentine habitats with these open Jeffrey pine forests, and also abundant old growth forests on the more productive soil types. So you have this wonderful contrast between the open serpentine sites and these more closed, almost coastal type old growth forests up near Round Top Mountain. So the Applegate River watershed is one of the most diverse watersheds in Oregon. It supports a wide variety of forest habitats, grasslands, chaparral habitats, hardwood species, and woodlands. And you can see that here in this photograph taken from Big Red Mountain, looking down into the Little Applegate River watershed, where the high elevation forests transition down into the grasslands, the oak woodlands, and the chaparrals down in the Little Applegate River watershed area in the Dakapatiti roadless area. The watershed is really important because it contains some of the most intact low elevation habitats remaining in Western Oregon. It also contains some very beautiful old growth forests at all elevations, from the high elevations on the Pacific Crest Trail shown here in this photograph, all the way down into those low elevation canyons in the Applegate River or in the Applegate foothills. So you have this wide variety of forest types, and then you also have old growth forests represented within all of those different forest types. So the Applegate River watershed contains a vast networks of wildlands on the Siskiyou Crest. And we believe at our organizations, the Applegate Neighborhood Network and the Klamath Forest Alliance, that protecting these biological values in the Applegate Siskiyous should be one of Oregon's most important conservation goals. From a botanical standpoint, the region contains a diverse mixture of plant associations, rare and endemic plant species, rich conifer forests, and intact habitats that need protection. From the perspective of conservation biology, the Applegate River watershed is regionally important for its connectivity. And that, not only are there beautiful old growth forests and these beautiful intact plant communities, but we also have some really important wildlife habitats that we really didn't go over very well in this presentation, because we're mostly focused on the botanical values. But one of the critters that was really important in the Applegate River watershed is the Siskiyou Mountain salamander, shown here in this slide. And the Siskiyou Mountain salamander is a really interesting species. It's endemic to the Applegate River watershed, so it's found nowhere else in the world. And it lives in rocky, moss-covered talus habitats shaded by late successional or old growth forest. The Siskiyou Mountain salamander breathes through its lungs, and so it's very dependent on cool, moist habitat conditions. It also cannot disperse. This little critter lives most of its life in a handful of square feet within these talus slopes. In the summer months, the Siskiyou Mountain salamander burrows deep into the crevices in these rocky talus slopes to retain moisture, and you will only find it surfacing during the wet winter months, during particularly wet periods. And so this is a species that is not only important because it's endemic to our watershed, but is also important because it depends on old growth habitats that are becoming increasingly rare throughout the West. And because it cannot disperse, it cannot move, it cannot find additional suitable habitat if its current habitat conditions are impacted or destroyed by commercial logging. So not only do we have this important salamander species that's endemic to our area, but the region also supports a lot of abundant wildlife: black bear, cougar, bobcat, great gray owls throughout the watershed. There's northern spotted owl habitat throughout the watershed. And we also support some of the largest populations of Pacific fisher, which was recently listed as an endangered species in its limited range here in northwestern California and southern Oregon. And it's really, the Applegate is really important because it connects together these remnant populations in southern Oregon and northwestern California, providing connectivity between populations and increased genetic diversity. So it's really important not only for botanical species, but also for wildlife species. So the Applegate River Watershed contains globally significant levels of biodiversity. And we encourage folks to get out into this little known region, this underappreciated region. And we encourage you to get out and get to know the spectacular biodiversity, the beautiful mountain scenery, and the year-round hiking opportunities at both high and low elevations in the Applegate River Watershed. We really, truly believe the Applegate River Watershed is one of Oregon's most important conservation opportunities. And we would really encourage folks to join us as we advocate for the protection of wildlands, biodiversity, and connectivity in the Applegate Siskiyous and on the Siskiyou Crest. So thank you for enjoying this presentation. We hope to see you down here in the Siskiyous, and we hope that you will join us in the fight to protect this important region. Thank you.